tell you is this. I deeply believe that Bosnia and Herzegovina should have friends throughout the world, and that's not an issue. Anyone who wants us to be a true friend to us, there's no reason for us not to be true friends with them. But our path is known. It is clear. It is derived from the geographic location, if you will, from the cultural environment. We belong to Europe, to the European continent, and the most logical thing is that we be in this family of European nations, and this means the EU, and it also means NATO. NATO is somewhat of a broader scope that goes beyond the borders of the European continent, but in most cases those are countries, well, most of those countries, I'm not talking about every single one of them, but most of them are countries that operate under the terms of liberal democracy, and they are trying their best to have a strong legal system that's not subject to the will of an individual, but to the system. So Bosnia and Herzegovina needs to take this path. This is the right path to join the family of these nations. And I don't want to sound pretentious. On the other hand, we have to take care of how big we are and how important we are, and we need to build friendly relations with everyone in the world. What's Putin going to do? I don't know. I really don't know. There's different information that this is about pressure on Baltic countries, on Baltic states, that this is pressure on Scandinavia and on Moldova. So what's Russian official politics going to do? We don't know right now. We will follow everything that goes on, but from what I can see now, Russia is still focused on Ukraine, and it's focusing most of its resources and capacities there. And ultimately, this question should have been forwarded to Minister Lavrov. I'm sure that you would have gotten a more precise answer from him. But in the Balkans, unfortunately, and that's been my life experience, and I'm 60 now, you should always be cautious, because as there's a saying that goes, if you were bitten by a snake, you are afraid of lizards. What I'm worried about in the region is increased armament. Serbia spends huge amounts of money on top-of-the-range systems. Croatia does it, but Croatia is a NATO member, so that's subject to control and supervision of NATO. What I know from my own experience, no one's buying arms, no one's amassing troops unless they want to use them. That was the case with Ukraine. Concentration of Israeli troops at the border with Gaza. So you immediately begin to ask yourself, what's this about? Why so many arms? What are they getting ready for? Western Balkan countries, I mean, we are not economic or military superpowers, and if someone is stockpiling weapons, then you immediately think of a war in our region. And this world has shown itself to be very cruel. International law norms in the decision-making centers, and even those who call themselves democratic institutions, this doesn't mean anything. Might is right, and anyone can use this might without any justification. What can we expect from this world? Bosnia and Herzegovina always has to keep in mind this fact. We in Bosnia and Herzegovina, at least the generation that I belong to, we are very cautious and sensitive about that, and we might exaggerate with these analyses sometimes, but it's better to be cautious than to be caught off guard.
EU negotiation talks and close ties with Russia.
Prvo, ja ne mislim da je u redu što ste vi mene prozvala, niste gospodina Bećirovića, jer po našem redoslijedu u predsjedništvu ovako idemo kako sjedimo.
Ne u redu, samo kažem da se ne da nije fair, pa ne... forward question, so it's not fair. Please don't discuss it with me. And unless you want him to say the final word. And another thing, please allow me, I'm a member of the presidency, please don't interrupt me. So, you're okay. You're in a position to ask questions. I want to be decent, and I want to tell you again that we in Bosnia and Herzegovina should be dealing with things that we agree on. One of the things, supreme thing that we agree on is our European path. There are no dilemmas in that regard. And you could hear no one saying something against that. But we do have problems in overcoming certain solutions. That's definitely the case. So we have this problem. But I think all of us need to invest the best we can, and the EU understands these circumstances. This is important for the region and for the EU that we should become a member. It's not going to happen soon, but it's a goal that hasn't changed. And now in Bosnia and Herzegovina, neither in Federation or Republika Srpska, you hear no voices that are against the EU. I mean, the situation there is difficult. Prices are rising. People are exposed to certain things that they haven't been exposed to in the past decade. It was a place of well-being. And I like the fact that we are still dedicated to the European path, and we should keep things this way. And in my politics, EU plays a central role, one of the central roles. There should be no obstacles to development of economic ties and development of projects with anyone in the world, no matter who they are. And you said it well. We have traditional and emotional ties with Russia as well. And I think that this Russian attitude to Bosnia and Herzegovina is principle-based. I'm not an advocate of Russia. I'm not that, and I don't know what grand designs Vladimir Putin has or Joe Biden. I do not aspire to that. I'm trying to explain to you our microcosmos called Bosnia and Herzegovina and how it fits into this difficult global situation. And I think that we should look at it from that perspective, what's better for us, what's good for us. I see no threats from anyone, and neither do I think that if someone is arming themselves in the region, I don't see a threat, I don't see a potential for that, and I don't see a potential for any sort of conflict. Within Bosnia and Herzegovina, there are political misunderstandings, and they are deeply rooted. And a lot of time will pass before we overcome them, before we get on the same page politically. However, this means that we need to focus on our economic development, and we need to understand ourselves and understand our limitations. Not everything in the world is revolving around us, who's going to attack us, who's not. So Bosnia and Herzegovina had many challenges on its development path. My colleague talked about NATO, so we talked about security as well. Recently, we had a very pleasant dinner with the NATO Secretary General, and what I liked was a realistic approach when he said movement toward NATO, each country sets the pace for that. We're not the ones who impose anything on you, and my colleague Bećirović mentioned here, he made a reference to Republika Srpska, he mentioned our unanimous support for the NATO path. This unanimity existed, and in the golden age of that political will of our moving towards NATO, NATO did nothing about that, and every politician knows that, and now they insist on something. They are quite sober, and I highly support the statements coming from NATO. They gave balanced statements and communiques, and everyone could recognize themselves in those statements. And we see them as partners, and now we have the reform program with NATO that says that we need to build up on our cooperation, but it doesn't prejudge membership. And so we're going to make decisions on that subsequently as regulated. And the perspective for Bosnia and Herzegovina is the EU, and I hope that the EU will overcome its problems. I hope that the EU won't become a victim to some global developments. I sincerely hope that. Bosnia and Herzegovina has gone through a difficult path, and I keep hearing my colleagues in public discourse references to Republika Srpska and our laws on this difficult development path. Bosnia and Herzegovina was marked as a problematic spot in terms of security. Back in 2015, the BBC, which is not a big fan of Republika Srpska, they said that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a hotbed of modern jihad, and it has the biggest number of people per capita going to foreign war zones. But we have overcome all of that now, and we can be rational that I must say that the country is faced with many problems and misunderstandings. But it's not going to become better by me saying that you're no good, or if you're going to say that I'm no good. That's not the recipe for the country. The formula for the country is that we sit down and talk, and all the institutions should be run in the way that our citizens want, and we don't want us to waste time talking empty talk. And if I'm going, and I really don't want to turn anyone's success against them. We need to be rational and neglect some major rational appetites. And if you don't threaten anyone, and what you said, none of this is contravention of the EU path, and we want to move toward the EU path.
Path on the things that we do agree on, and thank you very much for that. That's exactly what was my point during this discussion.
Means that women can be very mean. Yes, that's true. Even in politics. Thank you.
I actually wanted to give a floor to a lady before I go to men. Thank you all once again. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for staying so late here for us. Dear members of the presidency, chairman of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you. Yes, please, one sentence, Mr. Bečirović.
Meni je potpuno svejedno da li govorim prvi ili zadnji.
I truly don't care if I'm the first or the last to speak. We need to make use of our time rationally and send precise messages. My messages are crystal clear. When it comes to NATO path, it shouldn't be called into question. It's a legislative requirement. Those who call this requirement into question are perpetrating a criminal act under the Criminal Code of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Hvala vam.